Elizabeth Chudleigh was not merely a lady-in-waiting to the Princess of Wales, but an audacious beauty whose name would soon become synonymous with a grand scandal. In 1744, driven either by sudden passion or cold calculation, she secretly married Augustus Hervey, the future Earl of Bristol. This marriage, which she hastily concealed to preserve her status as an unmarried lady and her privileged position at court, laid the foundation for her future downfall. Continuing to shine in high society, Chudleigh became an embodiment of freedom and defiance. Her revealing attire and independent demeanor shocked, yet also fascinated. She lived two lives, one as a secret wife, the other as a desirable single lady, surrounded by admirers. It was this duality that led to her catastrophe when, years later, wishing to marry the immensely wealthy Duke of Kingston, she attempted to annul her first marriage. This reckless step triggered a chain of events that culminated in the most notorious bigamy case in English history. Many consider Elizabeth Chudleigh merely a victim of circumstance or a naive woman cornered by societal conventions. But this is not the case. She was a calculating player, consciously risking everything for ambition, whose story is not a tragedy, but a meticulously planned, albeit failed, attempt to outwit the system. This carefully planned and failed attempt to deceive the system did not arise in a vacuum. It was forged in the crucible of 18th century England's harsh realities, where for a woman from a good but impoverished family, ambition often became the only weapon for survival. Elizabeth Chudleigh, daughter of Colonel Thomas Chudleigh, lost her father in early childhood. His death left the family, her mother, Lady Chudleigh, and two daughters, virtually destitute. The world in which young Elizabeth grew up was one of rigid social hierarchy, where a woman's position was determined by her marriage. Without a dowry, without prospects for a brilliant match, Chudleigh faced a choice: languish in obscurity or find a way to climb up. It was this environment, this abyss of financial insecurity and social pressure, that became the incubator for her extraordinary will and cunning. She saw how other women, lacking her beauty or intelligence, gained everything through a fortunate marriage. Elizabeth, deprived of this advantage, was forced to seek alternative routes. Her first steps at court, where she became a lady-in-waiting to the Princess of Wales, were not merely a search for employment, but a strategic maneuver. The court, with all its luxury and intrigues, became a school of survival for her, where she learned to read people, manipulate circumstances, and conceal her true intentions. The secret marriage to Augustus Hervey in 1744 became that point of no return. It was not just a rash decision, but a desperate attempt to secure herself, to gain some guarantee in a world that offered her none. Hervey, being a younger son and lacking real fortune, could not provide her with the future she had hoped for. But he was a member of a noble family, and this union offered her a glimmer of legitimacy. However, when it became clear that the marriage would bring her neither wealth nor status, and on the contrary, threatened her position as an unmarried lady-in-waiting, Chudleigh made a fateful decision to conceal it. This was not a naive act, but a cold calculation, dictated by the fear of losing everything she had worked so hard to achieve. She understood that acknowledging the marriage would mean the end of her court career, the loss of privileges, and a return to poverty. The anonymity and freedom afforded by her status as an unmarried lady were too valuable to relinquish. It was at this moment that Elizabeth Chudleigh definitively transformed from a girl seeking her place into a calculating adventuress, ready to take enormous risks to maintain and enhance her position. Her subsequent years, filled with balls, intrigues, and flirtations, were not just a social life, but a constant game, where every step was aimed at strengthening her false image and finding a new, more advantageous match that could finally provide her with the security and luxury she had dreamed of since childhood. Such a desperate, multi-year game played by Elizabeth Chudleigh was not a unique phenomenon, but merely the most striking manifestation of the harsh reality that governed 18th century England. It was a century of paradoxes, the age of enlightenment, proclaiming reason and liberty, simultaneously entrenched an incredibly rigid social hierarchy where a person's position was determined by birth and wealth. England, undergoing the Industrial Revolution, rapidly accumulated capital, but this capital remained in the hands of a few. For the vast majority, especially women, financial independence remained an elusive dream. Marriage for a woman of the upper or middle class was not merely a union of two hearts, but a cold economic calculation, a tool for survival and advancement. Society presented itself as a vast marriage market where brides with dowries were highly valued, while those without were marginalized, condemned to poverty or humiliating dependence. In such a system, where survival depended on a good match, ambition became not a vice, but a vital necessity, and moral principles often yielded to the prospect of social ruin. Women from impoverished aristocratic families, like Chudleigh, were particularly vulnerable. They possessed a name but lacked the means to maintain a corresponding status. Their education and upbringing prepared them for life in high society, but without financial support, that door remained closed. A lucrative marriage seemed the only salvation, but competition was fierce. It was this desperation that pushed many to desperate measures, and the flawed system encouraged cunning and deception. The political climate of the time also contributed to such schemes. Laws were disparate, and their application often arbitrary. This was especially true for marriage law. Before the passage of Lord Hardwicke's Act in 1753, which required marriages to be registered and performed in a church, clandestine weddings were common. In England, common law recognized a marriage as valid if it was entered into by mutual consent of two parties, even without witnesses or a priest. This created a huge loophole for fraud and bigamy, allowing people to enter into multiple marriages without leaving official traces. Society, on the one hand, was obsessed with reputation and honor, especially women's, but on the other, it turned a blind eye to hypocrisy and double standards. Men could behave freely, their transgressions often forgiven, while for a woman, the slightest misstep could mean the ruin of her entire life. This tangle of financial claims, social restrictions, legal loopholes, and sanctimonious morality created an ideal breeding ground for adventuresses like Elizabeth Chudleigh, transforming her personal struggle for survival into a grand game against the system itself. And so, in 1768, after 24 years of living in the shadow of a secret union, Elizabeth Chudleigh decided on a step that was meant to free her from the past forever. She had found her ideal match, Evelyn Pierrepont, 2nd Duke of Kingston upon Hull, one of England's wealthiest and most influential aristocrats. To marry him, Chudleigh needed not just to appear unmarried, but to be so legally. She undertook one of the most audacious legal maneuvers of her time. Elizabeth filed a suit in London's ecclesiastical court, known as a jactitation of marriage action. In this unusual process, she accused her first husband, Augustus Hervey, of falsely spreading rumors about their marriage. Essentially, Chudleigh was forcing him to either publicly acknowledge their union or forever disclaim it. Hervey, who by then was preoccupied with his own career and perhaps himself wished to be free from long-forgotten obligations, did not actively dispute her claim. He did not appear in court, presented no convincing evidence of their wedding, and effectively tacitly agreed with her version. The court, based on Hervey's lack of objection and Chudleigh's compelling testimony, ruled in her favor. Elizabeth was officially declared an unmarried woman, free from any marital obligations. This was a triumph of her cunning, a legal trick that, she believed, had forever cleared her path to a new, brilliant future. Just a year later, in 1769, Elizabeth Chudleigh, now legally free, married the Duke of Kingston. The ceremony took place privately at the Duke's house in Knightsbridge, away from prying eyes. She finally had everything she had dreamed of: boundless wealth, the highest title, and an undeniable position in society. Life as the Duchess of Kingston was the epitome of luxury that most 18th-century women could only dream of. She sparkled in high society, hosted lavish receptions attended by the entire European elite, and embarked on opulent tours across the continent, showcasing her immense wealth and confident status. It seemed her meticulously planned scheme had worked perfectly, and she had finally reached the pinnacle, having outwitted the system that had once threatened to consume her. But this fragile construct, built on deceit, collapsed in 1773 when the Duke of Kingston died. In his will, he left his entire vast fortune to Elizabeth, completely bypassing his nephews and other direct heirs. This proved to be a fatal mistake. The enraged relatives, especially one of the nephews, Evelyn Meadows, were not prepared to accept this state of affairs. For them, it was not only a matter of money, but also of family honor, which they believed the Duchess had stained. They began their own investigation, obsessed with the idea of proving the invalidity of the Duke's marriage to Elizabeth in order to contest the will. Their persistence paid off. Detectives hired by Meadows unearthed irrefutable evidence of Elizabeth's first secret marriage to Augustus Hervey, and also found witnesses, including the clergyman who married them. They also discovered that Chudleigh, in an attempt to cover her tracks, had once tried to retrieve or destroy the records of that wedding in the church, which only confirmed her guilt and intent. Moreover, it became clear that the court's decision in the jactitation of marriage action did not hold absolute power in criminal law, and could be challenged if new facts emerged. In 1775, at the insistence of the Duke's nephews, Elizabeth Chudleigh was formally charged with bigamy. This was not merely a private matter, but a public scandal that rocked all of England. The accusation was so serious that the case was transferred to the House of Lords, the highest court in the country, where she was to be tried by her peers, transforming her personal drama into a grand national spectacle. The Tribunal of Peers, 119 lords gathered in Westminster Hall, became not just a court, but a grand theater where Elizabeth Chudleigh played the leading role. She had no intention of being a passive victim. From the very beginning of the proceedings, Chudleigh transformed the trial into an arena for demonstrating her primary tools: audacity, charisma, and considerable intelligence. She was not merely defending herself, she waged her own unspoken campaign, managing perception and public opinion. Chudleigh thoroughly understood crowd psychology and the power of a cultivated image. Long before the trial, she began actively working on her reputation, and during the process itself, she continued this strategy. Her public appearances, carefully chosen outfits, her impeccable yet unyielding demeanor, all were part of a calculated plan. She was a master of creating a sensation, capable of turning any situation into an opportunity for self-promotion. In court, Chudleigh carried herself with a dignity bordering on arrogance, challenging her accusers not only through her lawyers, but also by her appearance, her composure. This was a psychological trick of the highest order. Instead of appearing as a cornered victim, she presented herself to the peers as a woman unjustly persecuted by greedy relatives. Her choice of lawyers, her experts in this new battle, was no less strategic. She engaged the best jurists of her time, such as the famous John Dunning, Lord Ashburton. These men were not merely legal scholars, they were masters of rhetoric, capable of convincing even the most skeptical listeners. Chudleigh likely actively participated in developing the defense strategy, using her deep knowledge of court intrigues and human psychology. She knew how those in power operated and skillfully used this knowledge to present herself in the most favorable light. Her defense was built on the nuances of marriage law of the time, arguing that her first marriage was invalid and the ecclesiastical court's decision in the jactitation of marriage action was legal and final. However, despite her brilliant maneuvers and masterful play, the system proved stronger. The Tribunal of Peers, comprising 119 lords, after 7 days of hearings, delivered their verdict, guilty. On April 22, 1776, Elizabeth Chudleigh was found guilty of bigamy. The sentence was commuted. Instead of imprisonment, she was ordered burning in the hand, a symbolic branding from which she was exempted due to her status as a peeress. But the consequences were devastating. She lost all her rights as Duchess of Kingston, and her vast inheritance from the late Duke was threatened with confiscation. This was a crushing blow, seemingly the end of her grand scheme. But Elizabeth Chudleigh was not one to give up. Her incredible adaptability became fully apparent. Instead of despairing, she immediately turned her defeat into a new opportunity. Hours before the verdict was delivered, anticipating the outcome, she hastily left England, avoiding shame and further legal prosecution. This was another audacious move, proving her willingness to take risks and her ingenuity. She embarked on a grand tour of Europe, where her scandalous fame paradoxically became her new calling card. Elizabeth Chudleigh, now the adventurous Duchess, was received with curiosity and even admiration at many European courts. Her story, her courage, her ability to defy conventions, all intrigued high society. She used her notorious reputation as a magnet, opening doors that were closed to others. It was during this period of her life that one of the most astonishing chapters unfolded: her friendship with the Russian Empress Catherine the Great. Chudleigh arrived in St. Petersburg in 1777, where she was received with royal honors. Catherine, herself an extraordinary personality, admired Elizabeth's boldness and independence. The Empress perhaps saw a kindred spirit in Chudleigh, a woman who was not afraid to challenge societal norms and build her life on her own terms. Elizabeth, in turn, skillfully used this patronage. She not only lived in luxury, establishing a magnificent palace and even purchasing an estate near St. Petersburg, but also became an influential figure at court, using her charisma and experience in intrigue to maintain her position. She even attempted to establish trade relations between Russia and England, demonstrating not only her social but also her business acumen. This friendship with one of the world's most powerful rulers became the apotheosis of her adaptive abilities, proving that even after a complete downfall in her homeland, Elizabeth Chudleigh could not only survive, but thrive, rebuilding her life from scratch, using her unique toolkit on a new, even grander stage. She continued to play, and the stakes remained high. But Chudleigh's story is not only about her personal triumphs and failures, but also about those who surrounded her, who supported her, and who ultimately caused her downfall. If her early years at the Princess of Wales's court can be called her first patronage, it was less a favor and more a strategic door she opened herself. The status of a lady-in-waiting, though it did not bring wealth, gave her invaluable access to high society, where she could observe, learn, and build her network of connections. It was here, in the labyrinth of court intrigues, that she laid the groundwork for her future game, learning the subtleties of survival and advancement. And while it is difficult to name direct beneficiaries other than Elizabeth herself, her rapid ascent undoubtedly eased the plight of her impoverished mother and sister, indirectly raising their social standing and saving them from humiliating poverty. In the 18th century, when a woman without a dowry was doomed, the ability to rely on a successful relative, even through scandal, was a true salvation. However, the real drama unfolded when a man who embodied everything she fought against stood in Elizabeth's path: old customs, unshakable traditions, and a sense of offended ancestral pride. Evelyn Meadows, the nephew of the late Duke of Kingston, was not just one of the numerous relatives bypassed in the will. He was a representative of the very aristocratic establishment that Chudleigh had so masterfully attempted to deceive. For him, it was not only about the colossal inheritance and these were fabulous sums, enough to allow several generations to live in luxury, but also about the reputation of his family, the honor of the Pierrepont lineage, which, in his opinion, had been stained by this impostor duchess. Meadows, like many of his circle, was deeply rooted in a system where lineage and social status were valued above all else. He saw Chudleigh not merely as a fraudster, but as a threat to the very foundation of their world. Meadows was an ambitious and influential man, well versed in the labyrinths of English justice and social pressure. He did not accept the injustice he perceived in his uncle's will and took it as a personal insult. His determination was reinforced not only by a desire to reclaim the family wealth, but also by a deep conviction in the moral righteousness of his cause. He believed that Chudleigh had not only deceived his uncle, but had also trampled upon all the unwritten laws of high society, using cunning and deceit to achieve her goals. For Meadows, this was a battle not only for money, but also for the restoration of order, for the triumph of true aristocracy over a daring upstart. He possessed all the resources necessary for such a fight: immense wealth, connections in the highest echelons of power, and an unwavering will. He began his investigation with methodical precision, utilizing all available resources and connections. Meadows did not just hire detectives, he mobilized an entire army of lawyers, informants, and social gossips, transforming a private inheritance matter into a public campaign of exposure. He knew that Elizabeth's most vulnerable point was her first marriage, which she had so meticulously concealed. And while Chudleigh shone in St. Petersburg, enjoying the Empress's friendship, Meadows tirelessly gathered evidence, step by step, unraveling the tangle of her lies. He found not only the clergyman who married her to Hervey in distant 1744, but also witnesses who could confirm the marriage. He even discovered her attempts to destroy the marriage records, irrefutable evidence of intent that shattered all her previous legal maneuvers. This persistence, this fanatical devotion to his goal, distinguished Meadows from other, less resolute relatives. He didn't just want money, he wanted the complete and public humiliation of the woman who, he felt, had trespassed upon the sacredness of his lineage and the very concept of aristocratic honor. His actions were not merely a lawsuit, but a crusade against everything Elizabeth Chudleigh represented: her independence, her audacity, her ability to transgress conventions. It was his relentless will that transformed the will scandal into an unprecedented bigamy trial in the House of Lords, making him the chief antagonist in this multi-year drama, whose resolve proved stronger than all the tricks of the adventurous Duchess. He was the anchor that, in the end, pulled her ship back to English shores, where reckoning awaited, and his triumph became not only financial, but also a moral defeat for Chudleigh.